Hello, and welcome to Lightwork Presents Everything is Connected, the Sharjah Biennial 16 edition, sponsored by the Sharjah Art Foundation. I'm your host, Folasade Ologundudu. The Sharjah Art Foundation is an advocate, catalyst, and producer of contemporary art within the Emirate of Sharjah and the surrounding region. In dialogue with the international arts community, the Foundation advances an experimental and wide-ranging programmatic model that supports the production and presentation of contemporary art, preserves and celebrates the distinct culture of the region, and encourages a shared understanding of the transformational role of art. Organized by the Foundation, Sharjah Biennial's 16th edition, SB16, convenes under the title To Carry, a multivocal and open-ended proposition, exploring the ever-expanding questions of what it means to carry and how to carry it. SB16 is an invitation to encounter the different formations and positions of the 5 curators, as well as the constellation of resonances they have gathered. Curated by Aliyah Swastika, Amal, Khalaf, Megan Tamati Quinnell, Natasha Jin, and Zainab Oz, the biennial unveiled more than 650 works by nearly 200 participants, including more than 200 new commissions. The biennial was launched on February 6, 2025, and will continue through June 15, 2025. During this exclusive capsule season, I'll engage in dialogue and discourse with artists participating in the Sharjah Biennial who are presenting new commissions. Throughout the series, you'll hear from artists across the globe, from Australia and Kenya to London and Nigeria and more. You'll hear us discuss a wide range of topics, from each artist's practice to their reflections on our society and the questions they investigate through their work. Please join me as I share these dynamic conversations with you, exploring the ins and outs and inner worlds of artists participating in the Sharjah Biennial with their newly commissioned works. Let's go! On this episode, I'm joined by Daniel Boyd as we discuss his newly commissioned work presented for the 16th edition of the Sharjah Biennial, elucidated through the curatorial theme To Carry, asking questions such as, what does it mean to carry a home, a history, a language, a legacy, and a lineage? Born in 1982 in Cairns, Australia, Daniel Boyd is one of Australia's most highly regarded artists. In 2014, Boyd became the first indigenous artist to win the prestigious Bulgari Prize for his work Untitled 2014. That referenced Australia's long but little-known history of slavery. The painting is both a personal and social account of history. Pentecost Island was home to Daniel's great-great-paternal grandfather before he was taken as a slave to the sugarcane fields in Queensland. Through his artistic practice, he seeks to negotiate the identity of art, history, and cultural survival through his investigations of oppressed and colonial cultures. Daniel has been showing in Australia and internationally since 2005, and he participated in the 56th edition of the Venice Biennale in 2015, as curated by Okwui Enwezor. In this episode, Daniel discusses his installation for the Sharjah Biennial 16 and his use of black vinyl to create an immersive environment in the iconic star-shaped building, the Flying Saucer. He talks about his artistic approach, which engages with the history of modernism, the built environment, and First Nations Australian perspectives on placemaking. He also reflects on his responsibility as an Aboriginal artist to share his people's stories and how art can offer a counter-narrative to Australia's oppressive history. He elaborates on the importance of art in slowing down and engaging deeply, mentioning influences like the American artist Bruce Nauman and the Martinican literary titan and influential philosopher Edouard Glissant. Let's dive into my next episode with Daniel Boyd.
My name is Daniel Boyd. I'm an artist and I live in Sydney, Australia.
Daniel, thank you so much for joining me on an episode of Everything is Connected. This is a special episode on the Sharjah Biennial 16, under the theme To Carry. I just want to jump in and talk a little bit about your installation at the Flying Saucer and taking over that space with black vinyl that covers all of the windows of the building, which is an iconic star-shaped building in Sharjah, and thinking about the manipulation of light in the space and creating an immersive environment for the viewers. When you were originally conceiving this work and thinking about it with the curator, when you were in those initial conversations and thinking about how you were going to take over that space or inhabit that space in your work, why did you make the aesthetic choice to include this vinyl in the building and as part of your installation?
The approach was thinking about the history of the site, also thinking about architecture and the language of architecture that was presented to me to think about. And so, in essence, it's about modernity, it's about the built environment, it's about the local context, and they drive for me how I engage with the space. I also think about the accumulation of things when it's associated with a particular language, and the language of modernism comes with a lot of things. So it's a way for me to engage the history of modernism in the context of, and so it starts with thinking about what the space offers and what the language of the space has to offer to be expanded on. So it's just a way for making people aware of where they're standing and the context that they're engaging with the work.
Yeah, I think that's making me think about other moments in your practice where you've had opportunities to do large installations, thinking about creating site-specific work, thinking about the built environment and architecture, and some of the moments over your career where you've been able to hone in on that aspect of your practice and expand, moving out of just purely painting and moving into more large-scale works. Can you speak about those experiences when you've had opportunities to do immersive installations and large scale site specific works? What are some of the things about that are appealing to you?
Being a First Nations Australian, it is a way to expand on the language of the built environment because we've never really had the opportunity to be involved in. So when these opportunities come up, it's just a way of creating inclusive spaces that have a certain equity to them, where we understand our relationship to the site. It's a way for me to triangulate someone's place in the world and offer them a different way to experience a built environment. For example, in Sharjah, there are dining tables in the exhibition space as a part of the installation. And the tables share the same framework or visual language as the vinyl artwork that presents the parameters of the building transition between the threshold. And so the tabletops have these oculi that are removed from the tables. All of these holes are scattered randomly across the surface of the table. And I guess when people come to the table, they see it as an object that doesn't really function like a table. They see the holes as something that's impinging on their traditional approach to the table. I see it maybe a similar way that Bruce Nauman talks to artworks about just paying attention to the thing is the point. And when you're using the table, they're actually functional tables. When you use the table, where you place your glass or your cutlery or whatever you're doing, you just have to take a moment to understand your relationship to the table. So it's just taking a moment to slow down and pay attention to the experience. And so light helps me think spatially in that way. My visual language has always been about light. We spatially engage. In the beginning, it was about painting. So I was really interested in the surface of the paintings and trying to create movement in the surface through light with these lenses. They're transparent, scattered across the surface or dispersed with black oil paint between each transparent lens. So it replicates that language. But yeah, it's always been about the spatial relationship that we have to a particular experience or engaging with art in that way.
Yeah, that's bringing up a lot of questions for me. I like that you referenced Bruce Nauman. In hearing your response and thinking about the spatial environment, the built environment, what we experience when we inhabit spaces. And you touched very briefly on the experience of First Nations people and not having that sort of agency. For those who know your practice, they already know that through line and that you are drawing that connection in the work that you do. As you said earlier, through the language of painting first, your practice has evolved over time and you're continuing to engage audiences in your approach and thinking about challenging traditional narratives, especially through painting and through portraiture, I would imagine as well. I'm really curious to uncover a little bit of what were some of the things that were happening, or how did you get to a place when you began to move away from painting and into different forms and different modalities of your artistic practice? What do you think were some of the reasons or some of the things that initially got you there, wanting to branch out and wanting to expand?
I think it was just expressing that the framework of the language offered an expansion on the different ways people could engage with it. And in the beginning, I was thinking about how the person stands in front of a painting, and that kind of, I guess it's like a dance that you do when you're in front of the painting. You activate the paintings, they shimmer as you do this dance. And so you have a sense of authorship in the experience. And I wanted to translate that in a different sense of scale and space. I looked at mirrors as a way to situate people or the viewer in the language so that hopefully they had a better understanding of the paintings. It was also about trying to help the viewer for as long as possible. That's the goal, right? You want people to slow down. And I think it's a real problem with people having these opportunities to slow down. We're constantly bombarded by information, images, and these moments are really important. And I think that's what the arts do, is they connect with the aura. And I think that's the power of art. Things can't be contained. And I think that comes back to my experience as an Aboriginal person here in Australia. It is about control. So it's offering an expansion on things in a way that is beyond that. And I think in Sharjah, that's what the parameter or the kind of the edges, or what is traditionally known as boundary, or the containment of the interior, or this thing between the interior and exterior in the built environment. It's just making people aware of that thing, that there will always be a flow. Edouard Glissant talked about it as being a flavor. We all have these different flavors, and it's important that this understanding of borders and control in those ways, and in linear terms as well, that things have different agency and depending on their cultural context. And so what I'm trying to do is to get people to understand that things are complex and we have to acknowledge that.
Yeah. It's making me think about a lot of things. I wouldn't want to finish an episode with you without speaking a little bit about your piece, Untitled PW, not only because you became, at that time, when you won the Bulgari Award in 2014 for this work, the first Indigenous Australian to receive the award. I remember when I saw it, and I'm sure seeing it in person is a completely different experience, but I remember when I saw it online recently after doing more research about you, and then I remember seeing your work for the first time in person at Marion Goodman, which I shared with you when we met in Sharjah. I found it somewhat, the painting of your grandmother, really frightening and disturbing, which I shared with you. I just appreciated so much the pop culture references sprinkled in with these very intimate portrayals of people who were deeply a part of your life, and thinking about the culmination of things that are very intimate and things that are very distant from one, and how those can sit together. But one of the things that's coming up for me is that when I looked at the work Untitled PW, and I thought about what I'd read about you and the little bit of conversation that we'd had at that point, I was wondering if there is a part of you that thinks about your work from the standpoint of being responsible and steward to tell the stories that you're telling in a particular way, to reframe history from an Aboriginal perspective within the context of the history of Australia as a nation, but also as a place where things have happened. Like the idea that people came to Australia envisioning a world that they wanted to create, and that they did that by oppressing and completely stripping other people of their freedom and their rights and autonomy. And like the story that one hears about Australia and the reality are so different. And I say all of that to ask, do you feel a sense of responsibility to tell a counter narrative about Australia's history?
Yeah, I knew that when I went to university, I had a privilege being there. And I felt that I very quickly felt that it was a responsibility of mine to share my story, because growing up in a country where you're oppressed and your culture has been denied to you, it is, yeah, like I just felt like I had the opportunity to express how my people were feeling or feel living in this country. And so it was, I felt like it was something that I needed to do for my people. And I was 19 years old, I think. But I saw the power in the language of art that they were using or expressing their national identity through. And I didn't belong to that. So I was trying to figure out how I could express my place or my people's place. So yeah, it definitely it offered an expansion on that historical representation of this country.
Yes. Let's take a moment and roll the tape back to the opening week of the Sharjah Biennial 16, when I was speaking to Daniel Boyd about his work. We're here. It's the opening week of the Sharjah Biennial. Daniel Boyd, can you speak a little bit about what this experience has been like for you? What are some of the things that you've been feeling, thinking, seeing in your first sort of introductory reflections?
I need to start with solidarity. One of the key things that I take from this is coming together, and also it seems like a safe space to talk about questions that probably don't have room in conversations outside of a context like this. The opportunity to speak freely and ask questions that are unrestrained.
When you say solidarity, with who and how?
I come from Australia, and it's a colonial state. We have relationships to land, in relationship to imperialism and colonialism in similar ways to other parts of the world. So I think it's an opportunity to think about land and sovereignty and empire.
Do you find in your experience, whether as a participating artist or as an observer, do you find that biennales and presentations of art at this scale often offer those opportunities for reflection, much bigger issues?
Yeah, I guess with the power of these coming together, it's a way for an accumulation of voices to express similar things, and offers the opportunity for yourself to see how your work relates, or how you as a human being relate to other people.
So, for the folks who are listening who may be able to attend, can you describe a little bit of what you would walk into and experience in seeing your newly commissioned work inside of the flying saucer?
It's using the context of the space that expresses the divergent nature of these things, how we come together and speak about these things in a close way.
When you were speaking with the curator that you've been working with, were there any things that came out of some of your conversations that you found particularly striking or meaningful to you as you thought about what you would present and how and why?
We're dealing with the same thing separately across the globe in different ways. The works are quite expansive. They're allowed to speak to each other in different ways, in different contexts. The poetic nature of the works offer this opportunity for them to sit next to things or ideas that allows them to be read and expanded upon. Visual language offers a space for that to exist in this expansive way, and hopefully offer a sense of motion that people can experience. They're not these static things that they change and they shimmer. Flying saucer offer that opportunity to think about those ideas.
I want to go back to my encounter with your work at Marion Goodman in Paris. The show was interesting to me because you had family. You can see Magic Johnson. There's pop culture references where there's this sense of connectivity. And then the works in the flying saucer, you have these monuments. The question for me is, what is the connectivity between all of that?
The language began with paintings. For me, it was about how we stand in front of an artwork on the wall and this kind of dance that we have with the surface of the work. If you can imagine that the surface of the painting is made up of these convex lenses that sit on the surface surrounded by black. And for me, it was trying to dismantle the frame. When I went to university, what they taught us was the Western canon, and paintings that were most important to state or nation building in Australia were ones that related to the icons of colonialism. And I was really interested in the language that they represented, the power that was in these images. And it was about trying to dismantle that power and give a sense of equity to the frame. If you think about the surface of the paintings, they offer multiplicity and different exit points. So it's trying to break it down into something that has equity, because it didn't have a formal understanding of art at all. It was just a passion for making. And I think that was inherent in my body. But those cultural artistic traditions, they weren't a part of my community, or these forms of culture were denied to me through colonialism. My initial paintings were thinking about the power of art, but how people used art throughout history and the image in relation to power. So I was trying to give the power back to the individual. The monuments that you're talking to, it's the Apollo Belvedere, and he becomes the archetype of beauty in the West. And so, like, race studies and stuff are based in that sculpture. And America, and particularly in the South, they use this idea of beauty and the hierarchy of races and
Yeah.
in power and oppression. And they're big things. Like, they're not just a monument or a sculpture. All of these things, for me, relate.
And a final question as we round out the episode. For those who may or may not have the chance to attend the Sharjah Biennial, to see your work, to experience it in person, I'd love to hear just a reflection from you on maybe some things or something that you really appreciated most about participating with this newly commissioned work, whether that's the spatial environment, the built environment that you spoke about, whether it's the collaborative nature of working with the curator.
I feel like the premise of bringing together different curators allowed the curator that invited me, Megan Tamari, to be in conversation or creating conversations with people in solidarity. It felt that way. It seemed like there was a safety in presenting work in this context. I know that throughout the world there are lots of pressures relating to artistic expression at the moment. It also was, I think, it being a part of the Sharjah Biennial allowed me to continue conversations with other people from places like Africa and all over the world where these have been suppressed. It was nice to continue these conversations. And I think that I was very lucky to be a part of Enwezor's Venice Biennale. The people that I'm still in contact with from that exhibition play a big role in pushing back against that suppression. I think you were talking earlier about being in Chicago recently for a Pan-African conference or meeting.
Yeah, the Pan Africa Day Symposium.
So these things are important to me. I think about these moments like Marcus Garvey was in contact with the local Aboriginal community in Sydney. And I think it was in the 30s, the Black Panthers helped the Aboriginal community here who were being brutally suppressed by the police and the government to organize and to create institutions like the Aboriginal Legal Service and the Aboriginal Medical Service. And when people like Muhammad Ali would come to Sydney, he would go to these places. And there are also things like the American Indian movement. They had a lot to do with inspiring the takeover of Alcatraz in the early 70s. It led to the establishment of the Aboriginal Tent Embassy in Canberra. And I think it's the longest continuous protest in the world. And so these solidarities have been successfully suppressed they've never been a part of wider discourse. And so I think that's, at the moment, it's about expressing those relationships in a way that we can see those things have happened.
And see those connections.
Yeah, they've always been there. And it's just, I guess it's these platforms, they offer everyone the opportunity to come speak freely, connect with the essence of the art, which is about the freedom of expression in artistic traditions.
Yes, absolutely. I think this is a wonderful way to end the episode. Daniel Boyd, it's been such a pleasure to have you on an episode of Everything is Connected. This is a special episode in collaboration with the Sharjah Art Foundation on the Sharjah Biennial 16 under the theme To Carry. If you're listening, to all the folks listening out there, if you have a chance to go to Sharjah and see the biennial, I highly encourage you to take a look at Daniel's work among many other artists who are participating with new commissions. Daniel, thank you so much for a great episode.
Thank you.
Thank you for tuning in to this capsule season of Lightwork Presents Everything is Connected, the Sharjah Biennial 16 edition, sponsored by the Sharjah Art Foundation. These episodes were recorded both on site and remotely during the opening week and after the opening of the 16th edition of the Sharjah Biennial. During the episodes, you will hear the sights and sounds of the local environment from the various sites across the Emirate of Sharjah where the biennial takes place. I'm your host, Folasade Ologundudu, and I'll see you next time. Stay tuned for my next episode. As always, stay motivated, stay inspired, and stay up. Peace and love to all.